We're talking today with Don Sheridan of Allendale, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, Mr. Sheridan, can you start by giving us just some background on yourself? To start with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Allendale Township, Michigan, on part of the farm I'm still living on.
In what year?
In 1926, I attended one-room school here in Allendale, Tuttle School, through the 8th grade. I went on to Allendale High School, which at that time went through the 10th grade, and graduated in 1941, and then on to Coopersville High School and graduated there in 1943.
And now, how would you get out to the Coopersville High School?
Well, the first year I rode with a cousin, and then the second year Coopersville had its first school buses, and I rode the bus.
All right, so it's because Coopersville is some ways from here, so.
About 7 miles.
Yeah. All right, but you didn't have to walk all to school, the 7 miles.
Only if I missed the bus.
Right. Okay. Now, did a lot of the guys that you went to school with, say in Allendale, did they simply leave school after 8th grade or 10th grade?
It was not uncommon in that era to drop out after the 8th grade even, or here in Allendale sometimes the 10th grade. But and most of them went on to high school at that time. Earlier, during the Depression, many more dropped out.
Mm-hmm. Now, your family, though, was able to hang on to its land all through the 30s, and you...
With great difficulty. My uncle, who had 10 children, lived across the road from us, and they lost their place. It was foreclosed on them, and they had to move away from the area because of the difficulties of so many children to feed and so forth. So.
Okay. Now, did you have a smaller family?
Yes, I have a brother and 2 sisters. And of course, we sustained ourselves on the farm with chickens and hogs and milk some cows and scrambled down through it. I don't know how my folks did it.
Mm-hmm.
We always ate. Traded eggs at the store for groceries and chicken feed and etc. and so forth.
All right. Now, once you finished, let's see, so when then did you finish high school in Coopersville?
In June of '43.
Okay. And so you went pretty quickly right from high school into the military then?
Yeah, I had already been signed up before I graduated in high school.
Okay. Now, let's back up a little bit. Let's go back before Pearl Harbor. Before America got into the war, were you paying any attention to what was happening in the world, the war in Europe or that kind of thing?
A little, but not, it wasn't high on the priority list. We were aware of what was going on, the Battle of Dunkirk and the difficulties and so forth, but no, it wasn't day-to-day stuff.
All right. Now, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
The radio in the barn over milking the cows.
All right. And when that happened then, did you figure that you were going to get into it?
Well, within a few days, yes. Took a little while for it to all sink in, what was going on out there.
Okay. So when did you make the decision to enlist?
Oh, in my senior year of high school.
Okay.
I actually wound up in a program called the Navy V-12, which is a college type thing for high school graduates. It would have led to officers training, and unfortunately I was a poor student. That's as far as I want to go there.
Okay. Now, why did you pick the Navy?
So I wouldn't have to sleep in the mud and didn't have to wear a tight necktie.
Okay. Now, had you ever been on boats, on Lake Michigan or anything like that?
In high school, I was a member of the Sea Scouts. Okay. We had a Sea Scout chapter in Coopersville. But no, very little actual boating experience. No. Of course, we live here half a mile from the Grand River, so that it was around us, naturally.
Mm-hmm. Would you go swimming or go on rowboats or things like that?
Well, we often went swimming in the river.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So water wasn't completely foreign?
Oh, no.
Just no oceans?
And I knew that if I didn't have to sleep in the mud unless the ship got sunk, so the Army didn't look that good to me.
All right. Now, once you enlist, where do they first send you for training?
I went to George Williams College in Chicago on 53rd Street in the Hyde Park neighborhood. was there 8 months.
Okay. And what did the training consist of at that point?
Basic first year college.
Okay. So you were at that stage still in that officer training program you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay. So you're there for, now what was your daily life like at that time while you were there?
Probably similar to any other college experience, except much more confined by the fact that we were in the Navy and more regimented, certainly.
Now, did you get physical training as well as the college classes?
A little bit, yeah. There was some marching and so forth. George Williams College was a YMCA college, and so there was probably a little more emphasis on the physical side than there would have been on another institution, perhaps.
All right. And then what kind of guys were in there with you?
Typical college students, basically.
Well,
Kids right out of high school,
okay. And where were they from?
generally around the Midwest.
Okay. All right. And so you say you were there for 8 months, and then at that point, did you basically leave because of grades, or did you finish that stage, or what happened?
Grades took me to boot camp as an enlisted man.
All right. And where did they send you for boot camp?
Great Lakes Naval Training Station.
Okay. And what was that experience like?
Well, pretty much normal for anybody that's been through it. As a kid coming off the farm, happened to be up early every morning and so forth, we didn't have to work as hard. We did it at home. And the physical part of it was no problem at that age. And so I spent my, whatever, 8 weeks or whatever in boot camp and came through in flying colors.
Now, did you adjust pretty well to the military discipline, or did it help to have had that time at the college first where you learned some of that?
Not greatly. Military discipline is never a problem for me. I had discipline of being on the farm, and my mother had been a teacher, and discipline was never an issue.
Mm-hmm. So you knew how to follow an order.
Right.
Okay. So you get through boot camp then. What's the next step for you?
Well, they had a preschooling for radio technicians, which was a 4-week course at the Naval Armory in Michigan City, Indiana. And my problem in the college is math, but they still sent me down there, which was entirely math. 2 plus 2 is 4, just equations and 3 unknowns in 4 weeks. And they figured the bottom third of the class went back to Great Lakes for reassignment, and there they asked me, what school do you want to go to now? And I wound up in signal school. So I guess I was a better communicator than I was an engineer.
All right. Now, what did signal school consist of?
Well, learning the Morse code, the flag signals, semaphore, and the procedures and so forth for signaling, the flag hoist systems and so forth. It was all visual. Radio was in its infancy, and there was certainly no short-range radios of the type cell phones and all that was far in the future. So it was all basically visual signaling. Primarily, it was used the Morse code with the light.
Mm-hmm.
Was the primary thing we used.
Okay. Now, so that people who trained as radio operators often were timed on how quickly they could decode the Morse code. Did you have any of that?
Well, basically, yes, you had to be able to go, I think, 15 words per minute or something. Light is slower than sound.
Right. It's not like the 60 words a minute or whatever they had off of the radios. Yeah. Okay. So you completed that course successfully then?
Correct.
Okay. And about when did you finish that?
It was the fall of 1944.
Okay.
I forgot the exact month, but it was in the fall.
All right. Now, once you completed that training, what did you do next?
Then they sent me to another 4-week school for the specialty of the merchant signaling system of the merchant ships and the convoys and so forth. At Great Lakes, that was 4 weeks.
All right. And then how was that different from what you had with the naval training?
More specialized in the civilian world of communication, really. their protocols and so forth are somewhat different, but it's largely a continuation of the same thing.
Okay. And then once you complete that, do they now assign you to a ship?
Well, they had the Armed Guard Center in Brooklyn, New York. They also had one in San Francisco and New Orleans. And they made up the crews at the Armed Guard Center and sent you to the ships. And I was assigned to the ship, which was at the harbor in Philadelphia loading cargo.
Now, did you go through Brooklyn to get there, or did you just go straight to Philadelphia?
We went to the Armed Guard Center. I was there for 4 or 5 days, maybe a week.
All right. Now, a lot of people are not very familiar with how the Merchant Marine worked during the war. You had the regular Merchant Marine crewmen, you had officers and so forth, and people who went through Merchant Marine Academy and training.
Yes.
But there were also naval guards assigned to those ships. So what jobs did the naval guards perform?
The gunnery and communications. We had gunners, mates, etc., and handle the gunning, and then a couple of signalmen on the ship, and sometimes a radio operator, depending on what the ship's complement of radio people were.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so a signalman, so your job might be largely communicating with other ships in a convoy, or?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. All right. And so you would then need to know both the naval and the merchant marine codes, because there are merchant marine ships and naval ships.
Correct.
In the whole thing. Okay. All right. Now, what ship were you assigned to?
The SS John M. Harlan, a Liberty ship.
Okay. Now, can you describe what a Liberty ship physically was like for people who wouldn't be familiar with that?
Well, I guess the specs are on that sheet there, but they're about 450 feet long, 10,000 deadweight tons. Sometimes they're called Kaiser coffins. They were mass produced in as little as 5 days, start to finish, and they were highly expendable. They felt that if a Liberty ship delivered one cargo, it paid for itself.
All right. Now, was this a new ship, or had it been sailing for a while when you joined it?
It's been sailing for some time. I really don't know what the history of it had been.
Okay. All right. So were you replacing somebody else in the Naval Guard, or did you get a whole new group going in?
We were a new group going on. The normal practice when the ships came back to the States, the crew would go home on leave, and then another crew would be assigned to that particular ship.
Okay. And then how many men were in the Naval Guard for that ship?
About 12 to 14 on the type of armament we had, which is 2 3-inch 50 caliber guns and 8 20 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. Some of the ships had heavier guns, 4-inch or 5-inch, which took more men to operate, and the crew might go up to 20, 25 people total.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then who was commanding your group?
Generally a ensign or a Lieutenant JG, generally a 90-day wonder, as we called them. We were very blessed. We had our lieutenant was named Tierney. He was a New York corporation lawyer who later became a judge, and he was older. He was not a young kid. He was probably crowding 40, and a very mature gentleman, top-notch guy.
All right. Now, and then what were your quarters or physical accommodations like on the ship?
We had a compartment that had 4 bunks in it, upper, lower, and we weren't, because our crew was somewhat smaller, we weren't that crowded. I think we had 2 in the compartment, 2 fellas rather than 4 that could have been there, so we had a little more room.
All right. Now, can you describe then sort of the first voyage? What's it like actually setting out to sea? And
we went down the river from Philadelphia into Chesapeake Bay, and then sat there a couple, 3 days or whatever, and assembled a convoy of about 100 ships. And then we set off in early November, headed for the Straits of Gibraltar. And our first 3 days at sea were the stormiest I had in the entire time I was on the ship. I mean, stuff. Some ships lost stuff overboard. Waves are coming over the top. It was pretty wild. And fortunately, I didn't get seasick.
Did other men in the guard, naval guard, get sick?
Well, all over the ship.
Oh.
Yeah, it was very difficult.
Okay. Now, when you were on there, I don't know, were you afraid or worried the ship might capsize or sink or break?
No, not really. We were heavily loaded. We were drawing about 32 feet of water. It was unlike the destroyers that were around us, bouncing around like toothpicks. And so we were relatively stable, but it was pretty wild out there for a couple of days.
Okay. How long did it take for you just to get used to it physically?
Well, after the storm was over and things settled down, it went very well. There was no big problem. We had stand morning and evening security watches, and then there were 2 signalmen on the ship, and we alternated the daylight hours. We didn't try to maintain coverage at night. We're on call, of course, if something came up, but basically we did daylight coverage, 4 on, 4 off, type of thing.
All right. Now, during those storms, did you have to be on duty still and at a duty station?
Yes, actually, what saved my stomach was being up on the bridge where I could watch the wave action rather than sitting down in the compartment bouncing around.
Okay, sort of it distracted you or scared you enough that you just didn't sit there and feel the
Well, if you can
waves?
see the waves coming, it was far different than sitting down in a mess hall or something with a plate slide back and forth on the tables, etc. So, yeah, it's much more stable.
Okay. And on the bridge, then you're mostly there with the merchant marine crew or officers. Now,
Yes.
did they treat the storm as just routine?
More or less, they were more experienced, and we didn't have any real problems. Like I said, we were drawing enough water that we weren't bouncing that bad, and didn't seem to be in danger of sinking or anything. It was just all the ships just maintain course and speed as best you can, and we'll put the convoy together after we get out of it.
All right. Then once you do get out of it, was the rest of the voyage relatively smooth?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, did you have any U-boat scares while you were going across?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And did you see much of the naval escort?
They were around us. Really, there was very little communication between a ship back in the convoy like we were and the escorts. The convoy commodore was having communication, I'm sure, with the escorts, but he was someplace else up front somewhere.
Now, would you get messages from the convoy commodore or from the other merchant ships?
Yes, the normal procedure was pass the message down the line. The convoy was about 10 ships wide and 10 ships long, and got a square pattern, and then they would pass the message on down one ship to the next.
Okay. About how far apart do you think the ships normally were?
Several hundred yards.
And sometimes farther than that, or?
No, you try to keep it compact. It was more defendable if it was all together. Obviously, you didn't want stragglers.
Okay. All right. And then, so you go through the Straits of Gibraltar then.
Correct.
All right. Now, did you see the Rock and all of that as you went through, or was it nighttime?
It was early morning, but dark when we went through. And after we got through the Straits of Gibraltar, which was probably the hottest spot in the Atlantic at that stage of the war, then the convoy broke up and we proceeded independently to,
Okay.
to the Suez Canal and on through.
Now, did you stop any place along the way before you got to the Suez Canal?
No,
Okay. And then, when you get to the Suez Canal, did you just sail right through, or did you make port for a while, or?
we went right through. We never lost steerage way until we got down to the bottom of the Red Sea at the port of Aden. We dropped the hook overnight there. Captain on ashore.
Okay. Now, what impression did you have of the Suez Canal? What did it look like to go through it, or?
Well, basically, it's a big ditch through the desert, but you enter the canal at Port Said in Egypt, and we entered it early in the morning, go to work time, and there was an incredible sight of little boats skittering back and forth across behind us. I looked aft, and it was just one of the real incredible sights I saw. Voyage.
There were these rowboats, sailboats, motorboats.
Rowboats,
Okay.
primarily. Skiffs of all sorts of
Mhm.
sizes. Like insects out there. There's so many.
And did you have any idea what they were doing?
Going to work, I guess.
Okay.
One side or the other. There are no bridges
Mm-hmm.
to get across at that point at that time.
All right. And you get through, you get out the other end, you go down the Red Sea, and then you stop at Aden. And did you get off the ship
No,
there,
no,
or
just the captain and the lieutenant went ashore. Nobody else.
Okay.
Just overnight, and then proceeded around the Arabian Peninsula and up into the Persian Gulf.
Now, was your ship entirely by itself at that point?
Yes.
Okay. And then you go into the Persian Gulf, and then where did you make port?
The port was named Karamshar. It was created in Iran, or Persia at the time, to get stuff up to Russia. Our cargo was destined for Russia, the Russian front, to try and keep them in the war because of the difficulties they faced.
Right. Did you know what you had for cargo at that point?
It was a mixed bag: trucks, crates, lubricating oil, just a whole mismatch of whatever it seemed like.
All right. And then did you watch the unloading process while that was going on?
Well, to some extent, yes. We were able to make liberty there, they had a United Seamen's Service Club at that point, and we could go ashore. And as you know, the Navy doesn't have any grog on the ships, but we could get beer at that point, and took advantage of it.
All right. Now, were you pretty well segregated from the local population when you went ashore?
Pretty much, yes. Especially at that location. There really was very little local population there. It was not a major city of any kind. Just a port created for wartime
Right.
cargo.
Okay. And about how long did you stay there?
We spent about 2 weeks unloading. I don't remember the exact dates, but about 2 weeks unloading. And then we proceeded up the river. Then this is the Shatt al-Arab River. It's formed by the junction of the Tigris and Euphrates, up to Basra, Iraq. And we loaded a cargo of barley off barges. We were anchored out in the river and loaded this cargo of barley, which was destined for Sicily. Iraq was the breadbasket of the Middle East historically. The Garden of Eden, etc., were fairly close by that area. And while we were there, then a little sidelight, the merchant crew demanded to be paid if they ran the lifeboat as a Liberty launch, and the Navy guy said, "Get the thing over the side and we'll run it." And I had my first boat handling experience in this tidal river, which flowed quite fiercely both in and out. But that went on without any incident, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't go ashore. I was having too much fun on the boat.
All right. Now, did you see more of the locals there? Because Basra was a pretty substantial town.
Yeah, a little bit more, yeah. But as I said, I very seldom went ashore.
Right.
And there really wasn't anything I was looking for there anyway to speak of. So at least I didn't know. If there was, I didn't know what it was.
Okay. All right. So you load up in Basra and then basically just head back down the way you came.
Reverse the procedure back up through the Suez Canal, and I went through the Suez Canal twice and never got ashore on the African continent, in Egypt. We went to Catania, Sicily, and unloaded the barley, and then we went around the other side of the island of Sicily to Palermo, because we had an army truck tire plant that they had loaded also at Krumshar, and dropped that off there. And then proceeded to go to North Africa, one night stand at a ore dock to load ballast for the return trip home.
Okay. Now, in Sicily, did you get to go ashore at all there?
Yes, Catania was a wonderful city. The war had largely bypassed Catania. It was a city pre-war about the size of Grand Rapids, and it was in the spring, a lovely climate, And as we came in there, we had quite a few cigarettes accumulated, and the bumboats came up, and these cigarettes that cost us 50 cents a carton were sold for 20 bucks, and then we had lots of spending money on the town, and we were there enough days so that we could spend most of it.
Okay. Now, when you did go into a port someplace, did they give you any warnings about where to go or not go, or what to do or not do?
Not really much of anything. We really were kind of on our own.
Okay. Now, did the merchant marine sailors kind of keep separate from the Navy guards, or did you guys do stuff together?
Sometimes yes, sometimes we did things together. It was a congenial group, and yeah, we did things together as well as separately.
Okay. I guess it's a small enough ship, and you're on it long enough, you probably get to know each other.
Yeah, the merchant crew was about 40 people, and we were a dozen or so, so it wasn't a huge group.
All right. What was there to see or do in a place like Catania?
Well, it was close to Mount Etna, and so mostly party time, and we didn't do a great deal of so-called sightseeing, but then we were looking for girls and so forth.
All right. Okay, so you go to Catania, you go to Palermo, you stop off in North Africa, but just which port were you at in North Africa?
I don't remember.
Okay. And then you go back to the States from there? Or?
Yes, we proceeded back. We picked up a convoy at Gibraltar. I went back in convoy to the Chesapeake Bay area in Norfolk.
Okay. Were there any incidents along the way in the convoy, or was that a fairly quiet voyage?
That was pretty much routine, but one of the interesting aspects of it, as we entered the Gulf Stream, which is clearly visible as a different color water, very clearly visible, amazing. The convoy, which was a square 10 by 10 or 10 by 10 ships, about 100 ships, maintaining course and speed, went into a diamond pattern because of the flow of the water in the Gulf Stream. We crossed it in a matter of a few hours, and the convoy came back in a square pattern again. As we came out of it, it was just an interesting phenomenon. And the water was so clear, much lighter blue-green, and very distinct. There's a river there, the water.
All right. So then, roughly when did you get back to the States?
In April of '45.
All right. And then did you get a shore leave at that point, or what happens?
We had a 4-day leave while they fumigated the ship to get rid of all the cockroaches that came with the barley.
All right. And then basically then you just stay with the ship and move out again, or?
We went to Norfolk Naval Supply Depot, and we loaded a cargo of what I would call naval stores, chain, anchors, all the miscellany of operating ships. We loaded that and then went again in convoy down to the Panama Canal area and on through the canal. And we were 3 days west of the Panama Canal when the war in Europe ended. And went on to Pearl Harbor, Naval Supply Depot, Pearl Harbor. We were there about a week. We got to go swim at Waikiki Beach and see a little bit of Honolulu, very beautiful. And then proceeded back to the Pacific Northwest, Puget Sound area.
All right. And then what did you do when you got there?
We started to load lumber. And we went to several small towns, the Grays Harbor area, Aberdeen and Hoquiam, and then down in the Columbia River area, wound up at Longview, Washington, where we topped off. And then on the 4th of July, '45 is when we left going west again.
And were you going in a convoy or by yourself?
By ourselves.
Okay.
Which meant that as signalmen, we really didn't have anything to do. Nobody signaled to once we got out at sea. And that was a beautiful trip. It was, say, July, the ocean's peaceful. I slung a hammock out between the cargo booms up on the front hatch, and At night I'd go to sleep watching the mast tip against the stars. It was really gorgeous.
All right. Aside from admiring the view, what else would you do during all that time?
Eat and sleep.
Hmm. Did they have things? Do they have any kind of sort of entertainment on the ship? Do they have like a movie projector or anything like that, or just decks of cards? Or
We had a record player, cards, some
Mhm.
cards and so forth. Read some, whatever could. Um, but nothing organized, really.
Okay. Now, as you're making these trips on this Liberty ship, what sort of people were actually in the Merchant Marine crew? Were there foreigners or other people, or they?
We had an interesting steward's crew. They were all from mainland China. Now, unlike the regular Navy, on a merchant ship, there's a steward's mate that brings the food to the tables, and we had our own steward mate named Ah Ching, and we would order off a menu normally. I used to order every morning for breakfast, and we ate very well. And Ah Ching took good care of us, and it was very interesting to watch amongst the steward's crew, the Chinese themselves. Their menu was so much rice, and they were eating with chopsticks and held a bowl up to their face, and totally different culture than anything we'd ever seen before. But, we got along fine, no problems.
Right. Now, aside from the stewards, were all of the crew Americans, or did you have foreigners?
They were generally American, yes. One particular guy, old Tommy Ryan, had been sailing for years, and he was the drunkest guy you could ever see in port, and the best sailor in the world when he got 2 days out to sea.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, you got your load of lumber then out of the Northwest. Where were you taking it?
We took that to Manila, Philippines.
Okay. And when did you arrive in Manila?
Probably about the 1st of August,
Okay. So a little bit before the war ends, but not
Yes.
by too much.
about a couple of weeks.
Okay. And then did you go ashore in the Philippines then?
Yes, we were anchored out in Manila Bay for a few days, and then we got assigned a pier, and they started to unload, and then in Manila we did go ashore. I had the address of a high school classmate who was in the Army there, and I looked him up and spent quite a few days with his bunch and did some sightseeing and went off to on an outing after the war was over, on an outing out to Cavite and the black sand beaches and so forth. And a very, very pleasant day.
Okay. What general condition was the city of Manila in, or what you saw of it?
Badly damaged, very badly damaged. A lot of buildings shot up and so forth. You saw some of the pictures I took. Yeah, it was really been fought over, and the war really wasn't over there yet because there were still Jap snipers around. Even so that when the war did end, we got the news at like 2 in the morning, and all heck broke loose out there. Noise, bells, guns, etc. There was one a tanker out in the harbor that we heard about that was loaded with avgas, and anti-aircraft stuff was going off above him. Lucky they didn't set it on fire.
Yep.
And it was a wild, wild night. Of course, my favorite story about the night was the fact that we were unloading this lumber, but across the pier from us, the ship was unloading a cargo of beer. And nobody guarded it anymore, everything, nothing. And so, yeah, we had quite a party.
So you could restock your supply at that point. Yeah.
We didn't have a supply,
Right.
that's all there was.
Yeah. All right. Now, did you see much of the civilian population in the Philippines while you were there?
A little, not a lot, but some. Around where my friend was in the Army, that was in kind of a residential area. One little sidelight, there was a guy that established a liquor store right next to their group encampment, but these guys were construction guys with big turnip poles and caterpillars and so on and so forth, and they told them if any of their guys got sick on his booze, they were going to run a tank or something right through his store, so nobody ever got sick.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff.
All right. Was the guy running the store, was he Filipino or American?
Yes, I never really met the guy.
Okay.
but I just heard the story.
Right. Okay. So you get the news that the war ends and so forth. Um, how much longer after that was it that you loaded up to leave?
Oh, probably a couple of weeks or so.
Okay. Now, did you take on any cargo in the Philippines, or were you going empty?
We loaded some Army equipment, uh, trucks, I think there were some tanks in it and so forth, and took it down to a Panay Island, to a port called Iloilo,
Mhm.
and unloaded that stuff there. And then we loaded on about 1,500 troops with no provisions for passengers.
Okay. So what did you do with 1,500 soldiers?
Well, they came aboard with their sea rations and their Lister bags for water, and they knocked together some troughs of sheet metal and a few boards across them, stuck one end over the side and a fire hose in the inboard end, and that was the sanitary facilities.
Hmm.
And those guys had been fighting up through the Pacific campaign and had been out there several years, and kind of stuck in a, to go home after the war, there wasn't any transportation out their way. And so that was the happiest bunch.
Now, how far did you take them?
We took them to Tacloban Lady, which was about a 3-day passage.
Okay, so it wasn't like you were going to cross the Pacific
No,
with 1,500 men in the
It was
hold of your ship.
just to get them to where there was more transport available.
Right.
I
Okay.
saw some real big poker games at passage.
That. All right. So you get then to Tacloban, and then where do you go after that?
Well, we took on some saltwater ballast and headed for San Francisco.
Okay. Now, was that your last voyage, or?
Yes, that was the last voyage.
Okay. And then what did you do when you got to San Francisco?
Well, they brought us up to a pier, and we tied up there for a week or 10 days. A merchant crew got off the ship. Some of the gun crew members were able to go home and had more time in, and the rest of us stayed on the ship. And then, so we did see a lot of San Francisco. And then they took the ship out to Anchorage because they needed the pier space. And since there was no merchant crew aboard, I wound up being the helmsman for this boat. Of course, we had a pilot aboard to direct what to do, but I had been around the wheel. I would take the helm occasionally at sea because I was up there on the bridge all
Right.
the time. So it wasn't anything real strange, but still, the only time I did it by myself.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you get your helmsman practice at that point. And then once you sit there at anchor for a while, then what?
And then we finally got off and went home on 30-day leave. Day coach across country.
Okay. So what was it like to get back home after all that time out there at sea?
Well, of course, it was all fun. We had a few bucks in our pocket because we couldn't spend it at sea, and well, we had a good time. Reunions with all my friends, those that were home by that time, and so forth, the family, and of course the war was over, so it was pretty relaxed. But then after that, they sent me to Detroit, reported Detroit on a train to Chicago, and then a civilian Pullman deluxe train back to Seattle, and then the Bremerton naval operations there on the Puget Sound. And then I was there for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, whatever, and with not too much to do. I was on the MA force, the kind of the part of the police force of the Navy, and then they assigned a whole bunch of us to the battleship Maryland, which was being mothballed. And there, in the Navy, rated people don't do work, physical work, but they had so many of us and nobody under us that we were the guys that did chipping the paint a little bit and kept posted a lookout so we hear the chief coming and start pounding again. And that's kind of the way it went through for a couple of months until I had enough points to get discharged.
Right.
So in March, I sent me to Great Lakes on a troop Pullman and went through Separation Center.
All right. Now, once you get out of the service, you're discharged, you get back home. What did you do after that?
Well, I kind of looked around for some work, and I went to work for a cousin who was a plastering contractor, and I was the laborer that mixed the mud and so forth. That was the summer of '46. Along the way, I bought my first car, which was the same age I was, a 1926 Model T sedan from the estate of the people where we went to church. And then a friend of mine who had been in the Navy, and little side stories, I saw him jaywalking in Honolulu, and went up and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Howdy." But anyway, we went to the high school baseball game, just messed around. And there was a couple of gals sitting there in the stands, and so we didn't know that they lived 5 miles out of town. I really were looking for a ride home, but which we provided, and now I've been married to her for 61 years.
All right. Now, what line of work did you wind up going into long term?
I went to work for Reynolds Metals Company, aluminum extrusion plant, and started as a laborer, machine tender, etc. Then the plant was covered by overhead cranes. I was a crane follower, hookup man for a while. Was a crane operator. We went through a strike. They closed the plant. So I went to work in Coopersville for a company that manufactured building supplies, furnace registers, that sort of thing, called Air Control. And then got laid off there. In the meantime, Reynolds thought they were going to reopen, and I worked maintenance labor for a summer. And then that didn't happen. And then the air control plant was looking for help again. I got back in there, spent the winter there, and then as the Korean War opened, they did open Reynolds plant, and I felt that going back there it would give me a better chance for promotion than the other plant. Mm-hmm. So I chose to do that and spent about 15 years there. And first as a crane operator, and then later a couple of years so I was in production scheduling, because the aluminum extrusion business is a custom business of all custom orders, and so they had to get the stuff through the plant, meet promise dates, etc. And later wound up in accounting and utility man and other jobs. And then in 1963, the boss came and said, "How would you like to move to White Bear Lake, Minnesota?" My first reaction was, where in the hell is White Bear Lake, Minnesota? Which turned out to be a suburb of St. Paul, the East Grand Rapids to St. Paul, mm-hmm. the end of the trolley line on the lake where the amusement park was. And I went up there as kind of administration, management, purchasing. We opened the first production plant in the country for aluminum beverage cans up there, and made beer cans for Hams, the mm-hmm. land of the sky blue water. I was up there a year and subsequently got separated, had to decide what to do next. I felt I'd be better off in Michigan with my family. We made 6 trips home in a year, and so I came home and managed to hook on with a company called Big Dutchman in Zeeland in their purchasing department. And Big Dutchman is the largest poultry equipment supplier in the country at the time, and so I was there in purchasing, and then moved on to some other jobs, got promoted to my level of incompetence, and separated there. I worked a couple of years as the manager of the supply room in the old Grand Rapids Osteopathic Hospital, and then in the meantime I became quite active in our local school affairs. At that time, in the late 60s, the state of Michigan was trying to force all the local districts, one-room schools, etc., into a high school district. And they arranged many shotgun weddings of that long line. They had elections. Allendale did not have a high school. The 10th grade high school I'd attended had been discontinued. I went back to K-8 after the teacher left to join her husband during the war. And so we had the political battles. The state wanted us to join with Hudsonville. We got a no vote on that attempt. Then they tried to put us with Coopersville. we even scared Coopersville so much they voted no against it. And in the meantime, found out there's nothing in the law that said you couldn't become a high school district if the community voted to become one. Or slightly prior to this, Grand Valley University was established in our town, or township, and so we saw growth in the coming. And subsequently went to the people with an election to become a high school district, was passed very easily. And then, of course, the top election, the bonding to create and build a high school, and so forth. And through this process, I wound up on the school board, winning by a magnificent managed level of 4 votes over the next guy. And for a 3-year term, at the beginning of my 3rd year on the board, we were having our first high school class. We're entering their senior year. There was practically no administrative staff at the school at that point. The superintendent was covered up with paper and piles and piles of bills. He didn't know what he had because he didn't have time to deal with it all. So he asked me if I could come in and work half days in a business office, and create a business office, which I did for a year, and then went full-time, and I spent 20 years there as a business manager treasurer of the Allendale Public Schools. And I retired in 1991.
All right. Okay, now, if we want to kind of look back to that time that you spent in the service, what sort of effect do you think that had on you? How did it change you, or what did you learn from it?
Well, it certainly made me more worldly, in a good sense of the word, more aware of a much greater world than Allendale Township, Michigan, that I grew up in. I think I got more at ease with people, certainly, and all the types of people you meet all over the world. It's really a very broad education in every sense of the word.
All right. If you think back to the time that you spent in the service, and especially on the ships, are there individual incidents or things that happen that kind of tend to come back to you that you haven't kind of brought up here yet?
No, not really. It was, like I said, very peaceful in the Pacific, very interesting going through the Suez Canal and around the Persian Gulf, seeing the culture over there with the limited amount we saw of it. Was these people, the poverty is abject, and the sanitary conditions, the roadside ditch is a sewer, the sanitary facility, and we'd see people, man urinating in the river, and 10 feet downstream, a guy was dipping out water to drink. Just incredible, that standpoint.
And was that more striking in the Middle East than it was on Sicily or in the Philippines?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course, that's the first place I saw such thing too. But yes, it was. Poverty there was, I think, much greater for the local people. Were much greater than it had been in Sicily and in the Philippines.
All right. Okay. Well, it makes for a good story and a distinctive one. So thank you for taking the time to tell it to me today.
Well, I'm glad I could do it. Thank you.
All right. And that's a wrap.